Video of the Damned takes on Camp Pleasant Lake. I've been camping exactly once in my life, and Video of the Damned watchers saw it because I did a whole episode from the campgrounds. A lot of you grew up camping, maybe with your folks, maybe you went to a camp like run by camp directors and camp counselors. The closest I ever got was watching Salute Your Shorts, and I guess a lot of horror films. For some reason, we could talk about the reasons, but camp and horror are interlinked. You know, Friday the 13th being the most infamous, but lots of different camp horror movies. We have a new one, and I like this premise. I like how the worm kind of eats its own tail here. It's a horror camp. That is an immersive horror experience at a camp. But what happens when real horror infiltrates the camp? Camp Pleasant Lake is written and directed by Thomas Walton. He has two other directorial efforts. One is called Room 9, the other is called They Turned Us Into Killers. And they have quite the horror veteran casts, but we're not going to talk about those now. We're talking about Camp Pleasant Lake, which has a very interesting cast. Michael Paré, who's been in tons of stuff, including Eddie and the Cruisers. Bonnie Aarons, you know her as the nun. Andrew Divoff, the Wishmaster himself. You'll recognize folks like Robert Lasardo, Michael Ferguson. Now for me, the MVP was Jonathan Lipnicki. I haven't seen him since his youth roles like Jerry Maguire, Stuart Little, Like Mike. And while I knew he's got plenty of work as an adult, this is the first film I've seen him in, and I didn't recognize him at first. Man, is he good in this. It's just so quirky and good. So what's the story? 20 years ago, a married couple was murdered, their daughter went missing, and their son was rumored lost in the foster care system. Now, on the site of this horrible tragedy, some exploitive promoters are going to throw on an immersive horror experience at horror camp. But what is real and what is for show? What is the horror promotion company? And what is either the original culprits or the ghosts of the victims returning to stalk the camp? What did I like and what did I think could have been done better? Let's start with some positives. This location is so awesome, and the way it's shot is so wonderful. I'm not sure exactly where this is. I assume it's Southern California, based on some graffiti I saw. And there's like these trains that go by and that are part of just like B-roll. And the camp itself is just neat looking. I really like the location, and I suspect that there's going to be more films shot there if there haven't been already, but I'm going to talk about that a little later. Like I said, really interesting cast. Man, Lipnicki is so weird in this. He's so good. Like, I want to see him do more horror. I want him to do more of this stuff. He's good. He reminds me a little bit of Brian Pillman. I don't know how many of you know who that is. That was a wrestler, the loose cannon. He's very loose cannon in this. It's not just the hair either. But really, there's a lot of strong performances. You always enjoy a good Mike Ferguson appearance. He's been in stuff that's on the show before. He will be in future reviews as well. My buddy Joe Sabatino is working with him in Vampire Penance, which I'm sure we'll review when that comes out. I won't be unbiased about it because I love Joe. This is a John Rain film. Anyway, let's talk about Mr. Walton and what he's made here. I really do want to see his other two films because he works with, like I said, great casts, veterans, and, he's got some interesting ideas. There are some very hammy things here, but I forgave it because it fit the tone. You have these kind of dorky horror fans who get off a bus and are there to enjoy an immersive camp experience. A lot of the dialogue about that is kind of repetitive, I will be honest. And there's also just some stuff that's confusing in this. So this isn't spoilers, like you need to know this for you to help keep track. There's two timelines, 2002 and 2022. For our purposes, let's call it 20 years ago and modern day. 20 years ago, a married couple who did not get along goes to a couples retreat. They drop off their son and daughter at a Halloween-themed camp to be supervised while they're at the couples retreat. There are mean kids at the camp who pick on the son and daughter. And because of that, the daughter wanders away. She's kidnapped and never seen again. We're told later that the son was made a ward of the state, I guess, and lost in the foster care system. The parents are murdered in the midst of getting to that couples retreat. 20 years later, either on the site of the Halloween camp or the couples retreat, or it's just all kind of the same wood area, there's this horror immersive experience camp. And what I didn't get, because it was kind of shoehorned in a kind of awkwardly paced and acted scene, the camp counselors, or the people playing camp counselors as part of this immersive camp experience, a lot of them are actually kids who went to the camp 20 years ago where the boy and girl were. And you know, there's some pacing and editing issues to this movie with the two timelines. Like at first, you know, again, the first 5 minutes, the way they enter into it is great. And then at some point they're around the campfire or what have you, telling the story of what happened 20 years ago. But that 20-year ago flashback is really extended to the point where you're like, oh, maybe the modern day is the frame story and what we're going to see all took place 20 years ago. But they're at this 20 years for so long, then boom, we're back modern day. And then we just have these quick flashbacks to 20 years ago. And I just would have paced it differently. But because the story is interesting and because it's, you know, a novel premise, you know, horror camp and real horror happens, I forgave it. But because of that pacing and editing, and because of some of the acting from the supporting cast that gets a little hammy, you know, the tone is just not as consistent as you might want it to be. But you know, the backstory, the masks, the great kills, it's interesting and new enough in this trope that we enjoy, this camp setting that we enjoy so many horror movies in. And why do we enjoy that? I guess because it's this false sense of safety because you're with a bunch of people, but you are in a remote area without nearby help, and you are a prisoner of the elements, really, and you are a captive of whatever murdering force shows up at that camp, and that's quite scary. So it makes sense, and this takes that camp trope and puts a new twist on it, which I enjoy. It's just so polished, yet so confusing at times. Like, I either need a cohesive story or shoot this all on Super 8, and the actors need to be worse and people I've never heard of. Like, it's either Friday the 13th remake or it's Camp Blood. Somewhere in between there is going to be confusing to me at times, but this is more on the high end, and so I really did enjoy it. Now here's some exciting news. Thomas Walton's next script is Cheer Bloody Murder, and it's a collaboration with Will Colazzo Jr. and Video of the Damned favorite, Julianne Prescott. The director, Sean C. Phillips. That's right, Thomas Walton is teaming up with the creative team behind Amityville Karen and a whole bunch of great low-budget films. I'm wondering if they're going to use the same campground. I'm so excited for this movie. I mean, look at this cast. Halloween Scout Taylor Compton, the late Tom Sizemore, Sean Whalen, folks who were in Camp Pleasant Lake, folks who were in Amityville Karen, Todd Bridges is in here. This is one of the best casts I've ever seen. Joe Castro, I hope he's going to do the special effects for this. So go check out this movie. Go check out all those movies. And then, yeah, let's watch some trashy, like, Camp Blood movies and enjoy some old Friday the 13th while we're at it. It's close enough to summer, right? I'm going to have another review for you this week. And so until then, I remain Hub. Special thanks to Ted Geoghegan for hooking me up with a chance to see this movie. Ted always gives me the best stuff. Thanks, Ted. Check out the rest of Morbidly Beautiful's shows, podcasts, and reviews at morbidlybeautiful.com. And as always, you can find me on social media at Brody Hubbard.